Today, I want to talk about CBDCs, cash cultures that use cash, and the direction that the future is heading in. Now, I have done a previous video on CBDCs and the CBDC tracker, which we will talk about in today's video as well. But if you're interested in knowing where your country currently stands in terms of CBDC development and whether that has been rolled out, if it's still in the research phase, or what part of the process the CBDC in your country is at, then you can definitely check out that video above. But I have been spending quite a bit of time, many years, for both business and personal reasons in Latin America. And the culture here, in terms of cash, cards, and CBDCs, is quite different than other areas of the world. So today we're going to dive into that. But before we do, a quote that I always come back to when thinking about cash card and the future of CBDCs and the direction that this space is really going in is from Klaus Schwab when he mentioned that you will own nothing and be grateful, specifically referring to the middle class. This quote is a great illustration of how the future is going to look, the trajectory that we're currently on with governments and countries really wanting CBDCs to be rolled out because there are so many benefits to them. Of course, there are false benefits, convenience, whatnot, very surface level things to the consumer. But when you are looking in terms of the government, there are so many benefits that are going to be beneficial to the government. An example that I always like to think of is back when I lived in China quite a few years back before CBDCs were really talked about mainstream. China came out with their yuan. And one of the biggest factors that really caught me up on this, which is now prevalent in all of these CBDCs, is the fact that governments are able to program when this money could potentially expire. Of course, increasing consumerist culture and really having all the benefit to the government, the institutions, the corporations that are running the country, and of course, not so much the individual. So, first, let's talk about Latin America because I have been in this part of the world on and off for many years now, and currently having been in Mexico for quite some time. So, what I've observed in Mexico is not uncommon, especially when we're looking at the rest of the countries within Latin America. But Mexico is very much so a consumerist culture, especially when comparing it to the other countries in Latin America. I was actually quite shocked when going south of Mexico and especially south of Central America, how much more similar Mexico was to the other countries in North America than to the rest of South America. And in that, of course, cards, bank accounts are used more widely from what I see. Now, not widely to a large degree, but more widely than when you are in South America. So, yes, of course, Mexico does have a very much so cash culture. Anytime I leave the house, I make sure to bring a card or Apple Pay and cash with me as well, especially because there are certain things if you want to get a snack on the street or some elote, then you really need cash. But if you are going into any store, there is always the option, of course, to use card. And I do see quite a few Mexicans, just from my personal observations, who use card in these cases. But that's beside the point because really the main point here is that cash is very prevalent still in the culture of Mexico. Do I see that changing in the future? I do, especially in a country like Mexico. I believe Mexico will be the first when comparing it to the rest of Latin America. But Mexico is very much so a cash dominant culture. Let's go to another one that we talk about on the channel here, and that is in Paraguay. Now, Paraguay does come with its own set of banking issues, especially if you're looking to get residency. Banking is not the place that I really recommend in terms of banking in Paraguay and storing any sort of larger amount of money. But in Paraguay, it is very much so a cash dominant culture. Now, Paraguay is similar to Argentina and various other countries in South America. They are in the research phase of their CBDC. A lot of countries are in the proof of concept phase, the pilot phase, or potentially have launched their CBDC already. Whereas Paraguay, Argentina, they're still in that research phase. So are these cultures that I foresee the locals using card and eventually CBDC more? Yes, but I think that will take a long while, potentially even a decade plus, to really roll out just from seeing how locals interact with payment systems in these countries, and a lot of locals are still unbanked. And not to say that they cannot get a bank account, but they simply don't want or need one. So, those are my personal observations from what I have seen in my time in Latin America. Let's go over to Europe, where the trajectory of CBDCs is essentially flipped on its head in Europe. And of course, this is not new news, but in a lot of countries in Europe, you can only use cash in purchases for up to around $10,000. Some countries, even $5,000. It depends on the country. They each have their own limit. But if you're going to be spending more than that amount in a purchase, then you are going to have to use some sort of trackable payment, probably card in this case, but in the future, I'm sure CBDCs will be favored or potentially even incentivized. I'm including the link down below so that you can see for yourself the countries that currently have this system in place where a certain dollar amount is limited. And while there is no country in Europe that is completely cash only, cards and using some sort of alternative method that is not strictly cash is very much so predominant, especially when you're comparing that to Latin America. So Bulgaria is one of these countries that is more cash dominant than a lot of the other countries in the EU. 28% of Bulgaria's population are unbanked, which is the third highest of all countries that were studied in this specific study, showing a very high dependency on cash throughout the population of Bulgaria. Now, Bulgaria was the most cash dependent country in the EU. However, it comes as no surprise that Romania is the second most cash dominant country in the EU. 9% of payments in Romania are cash based, so that is a very low amount. However, Romania does have the highest percentage of the unbanked population in all of Europe, which is 42%, as well as only 12% of Romanian citizens owning a credit card. Now, let's flip that and look at a country in Europe, which is Norway. Now, cash accounts in Norway account for 2% of all payments in the country, and 100% of the recorded population in Norway own a bank account, with 71% of the population also owning a credit card. So when you contrast that to Romania's 12% of citizens owning a credit card, the difference is quite stark. Now, in saying this, and of course, there are many other countries out there that are much more of a card based society, a form of payment that can be easily tracked, and that is increasingly becoming the norm. However, it's important to know that you yourself can take actions into your own hands and diversify as much as possible. Now, if you are a global citizen, if you are looking to become a global citizen, you have options. So, if you're wanting to leave your home country, whether it be full time, part time, or just have a back pocket residency or citizenship for diversification for what may come in the future, I, at Work, Wealth, and Travel, am all about banking diversification. I myself have 10 plus bank accounts in 10 plus countries around the globe. Now, are these accounts that I'm using on the daily? Absolutely not. Some of them are investment accounts, and some of them are simply just backup accounts. Well, others are, yes, daily spending accounts. But I like to keep these accounts diversified in different countries around the globe. And even if I do have multiple bank accounts in one country, I make sure to spread that money throughout various different banks and not keep all of my money in one specific bank or all of my investments in one brokerage. I have made a video previously about how it's becoming increasingly more difficult, which is the truth, to get an additional bank account. Most countries nowadays will not open bank accounts for non residents. We see that with clients, and I also see that on the ground when I'm in these countries. It is increasingly becoming less and less of a reality to be on a tourist visa, walk into a bank, and have an account open. That is the case in most countries around the globe. That is not going to work anymore as it has in the past. However, there are certain jurisdictions that are much more friendly, which again, I have spoken about in previous videos. So if you're interested in obtaining banking diversification or residency, citizenship, company formation diversification, reach out to us below and we're happy to guide you on what the process or opening an additional bank account or even multiple bank accounts in various different jurisdictions may look like so that you can have banking peace of mind as a global citizen. If you like this video, don't forget to hit subscribe and check out the video that's on the screen.